Brennan, here we are.
Let's do this.
God bless it. So Senator Burnt was saying, he was making this joke about how I had invited him on a long time ago. And the difficulty with getting, elected officials on and having people trust you, which is they have to trust you if they're going to come on voluntarily. But the thing to understand is like, Treg, you shouldn't trust people. Like if somebody invites you on your podcast, that's the worst idea ever because you don't know. And I had invited him on like over a year ago when it was like, the biggest thing I had done was interview like the mayor of Eagle. And here I reach out. It's like, hi, Senator Burnt. I was like, would you like to come on this podcast? And he was like, no. So like, yeah, you need to be hyper discriminatory because doing a good podcast as you do, and as you know, is really hard. And you have far more people that are bad at it than you do that are good at it.
Well, and I was also telling Treg not to come on. Like, don't go anywhere near the ranch.
That's why. So look, man, you are the host of Main St Idaho. God bless it. I, very much like Senator Burnt, I was trying to reach out to you guys last year. I will show you the Instagram messages. So whoever was in your Instagram and you don't have an email, I was like, do I have to send them a letter to their P.O. box? Like
fax. We prefer faxes. Come on. Where did you really reach out?
Yeah, dude.
Because I'm like fanboying here. This is big for me to be on the ranch.
Dude, well, thank you for coming.
This feels like there's that Spider-Man movie where all the different Spider-Man show up and they're all like
Spider-Verse.
That's this is the crossover of the century right here.
I believe you, minus the, nuclear waste spider. I actually really enjoy that series. They just came out with a new one. I don't, my son was just watching it, but they're like long 2.5 hour movies. But they do such a good job. The last one ended. Essentially, the moral of the story or the crux of the issue was that they were able to go through these different universes, right? The Spider-Verse. That's how like one Spider-Man from this universe meets the Spider-Man, and essentially that sticking to the canon of Spider-Man's dad getting killed as like this police officer, you can't break the canon. And so then some Spider-Man try to go to a different universe and stop that tragedy from happening, and that universe unravels. And so it became this moral question of like, if I know my dad's going to die and everybody's telling me it has to be this way, but I don't want to let this come to pass, should I fight to try to change the way the world is and save everybody in spite of it? Or should I let the bad thing come to pass because they're saying it has to be this way? And I was like, this is deep.
Dark, man. Sophie's Choice, I think.
I know. It was intense. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, I've been following you guys too. You guys right out of the blocks on the eastern side of the state we were essentially trying to do the exact same thing in parallel, which is talk to people in good faith to understand Idaho.
Yeah. And your point about Treg, Senator Burnt earlier is everyone's got an agenda. And that's the worry is like all these elected officials are like, so what's the catch? What are you trying to do? How are you trying to force your listeners into voting a certain way for somebody specific? And that's kind of where I think you and I operate in this unique space is we don't really have an agenda. Nothing specific. We don't have this ideological swing that's trying to force somebody to a certain way. We just want to talk the issues with the people that are like on the front lines, the important people.
Yeah. I joke. First off, you stole my line.
I bet you stole my line.
No, the man, the myth, the legend. You had Speaker of the House Moyle on, and you were like, the man, the myth, the legend. I was like, that's my line from like years ago. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I saved a copy of it. But
lawsuit pending.
How many times have you been working with people? And like you talk to people on all sides. Mm-hmm. I have talked to people on one side and been like, wow, this is really bad. And then you have somebody from the other side come in, they're like, it's not that bad. Listen to this. And you're like, oh my God, good thing I didn't take a side.
Right. So somebody, like, it was probably a meme on social media that said, I'm like one YouTube video away from being completely switched into thinking the absolute opposite on their side. That happens to me where I sit across from somebody and I'm like, whoa, This is the worst thing ever. Like, call everybody, the sky's falling. And then I talk to somebody else. I'm like, actually, everything's okay. And it's wild to see how spun up we get as information consumers over the littlest things. So I worked for Congressman Simpson, and it was always interesting to see, like, we were always one Fox News headline away from our phones blowing up. And the same thing on the other side, but I mean, the phones would just go nuts over something, and then it would die down once the headline died. And you can kind of notice there's people that are motivated by getting an emotional reaction out of the voters.
Okay. Now, this is something we barely touched on like 5 minutes ago, and I had to jump on my phone real fast. I want to talk about this. What I have learned, I've learned a dump truck over this legislative session so far, but one of the biggest things is that there is a gigantic industry around lobbyists, which people know, like big money in politics, but there is an industry around people getting bills heard, getting bills to the floor, getting bills all over the place without any intention of even getting the bills passed. It's not even that their organization is only going to make money if bills get passed. It's that their bill got heard on a floor, or they got a representative to run it. So people need to understand that it's like, dude, there's money here that is insane, and these people are getting elected officials at times to run things that like they're just like, please run this. I know it won't go anywhere, but like I'm going to make money off you doing this.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, compare it to a football game. Sometimes there's a Hail Mary bill that goes all the way through the first session it's introduced, and it's wild and it gets done, and that happens. But a lot of time, the lobbyists and the business interests are playing the long game, where they know this is going to take a few years and we're just going to move it ahead a couple yards. And this might be good stuff that we want. It also might be stuff we don't want. And you just got to be aware that a bill introduced that doesn't go anywhere, that then gets a hearing, that then makes it to the House floor. Like, you look at a lot of the major legislation that gets through, I think a lot of it took years of moving the ball forward a little bit each time. And there are people whose livelihoods depend on the success or failure of certain bills. And you just, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but you got to know that there are people making money on this stuff.
Right. The industry around this. And I think that leads back to the headlines, right? Like, if you can get people worked up, we've all known that the media is focused on getting clicks, but there are other things that we're on the ride for that we didn't even know, like introducing bills. We're like, this is crazy. I was talking to a friend just today, and she was very worked up over some bills. And I was like, it's probably going to be okay. Like that, like, I'm not saying don't be upset. Like, I understand your view right now is really scary. And like, I'm sympathetic. I get it. She's a good friend of mine, but I was like, but it's probably going to work out. You know, like, there's no value in getting emotional about it yet.
Yeah. So do you agree that the average Idahoan may get a little too emotionally invested in some issues and not emotionally invested enough in maybe the most important ones?
I think the average person does that.
Yeah.
Like, let's just, I don't know anything about other countries, but I can tell you for sure the average person gets for instance, school choice.
Sure.
Okay. And this is not an inconsequential issue. I'm not trying to put anything down, but like, that has sucked the oxygen out of the room, this entire legislative session. Mm-hmm. The first week, it was all about the pay raise, right? $500,000 is a drop in the bucket, but people were getting calls and interviews all the time. Like, do you support the pay raise? Do you think this is fair? Idahoans are suffering. You guys are getting, and it's like, fine, however you think about that, that's fine. But when you're talking about a multi-billion-dollar budget and you spend the oxygen getting sucked out of the room for a 7-day period based off of a $500,000 pay raise, it's like, why are you focusing on that?
Yeah, and the legislators' time might be their most important resource over there. They've only got a certain amount of time.
Like 12 weeks, man.
And I still can't figure out who's determining what the time is spent on. It's not as clear as party leadership. It's not as clear as chairman of the committees, but it's interesting to see, to your point, what gobbles up all the air in the room. And we always hear people say, we wish they would spend time on the issues that the average Idahoan cares about. Maybe they're spending time on issues that some Idahoans care about, and they're pretty happy with how the time's being invested. But it is interesting to note that I think as people get really worried about the big national issues that don't really move, and then there's a lot of things going on that it's like, man, I wish people were a little more concerned about these things.
Yeah. I mean, look, talk about an issue that everyone should care about. We have water. Right now, the governor obviously has put together a $30 million budget line item to continue researching, investing, and figuring things out with water. Okay, like, that should be cut and dry. Like, we need water really bad. He also put together $60 million for paying back what we spent on fire mitigation last year, and just working the fires, and then a $40 million recurring line item so we can go moving forward. Like, okay, so between those two things, it's $130 million out of like a $5 billion budget, $6 billion budget. And those are two things. We need water and we got to stop fires. And are we even focused on that? Like, those aren't dead giveaways. People are like, nah, I don't know, like water. Meh. It's like, listen, okay, maybe there are more important things, but for my liking, it's like, these are the things we need to fundamentally focus on, right? Like maintaining insurance. Like I talked to Director Dean Cameron from the Department of Insurance. Like we need to make sure Idahoans continue to have access to home insurance and things of that nature. Like these are the things we should care about.
But I always think of if you can't put it on a mailer when you're trying to primary somebody from the right, then why? Like then it's. I mean, how often do you talk to people where you cover all the big stuff, and then later on in the episode you'd be like, "So, Senator, what are some other things you're working on?" And then they talk about the stuff they actually care about. There are these obscure bills that matter that constituents brought to them that are very specific. That I'm thinking nobody's ever going to report on that. It's going to go through. Everyone's going to vote for it. It's going to be fine, and it's never going to make the news. And those are the things they really care about. But you got to talk about the stuff that's going to be on a campaign flyer.
I got one for you that I guarantee will never be reported on just by the nature of it. Okay, this one is fantastic. There is a requirement in state law right now that you have public notice about things like elections. Okay, so county clerks have to publish when an election is going to be, the time, the place, all the bits, right? And they have to publish it in a local newspaper so the populace can get informed. Now, one, how many people are reading like the Statesman to find out where the election is being held, right? Two, if you talk to Representative Heather Scott, she will tell you that in her district, they don't even have a local newspaper that reaches the constituents. So, but they're still required across the state to publish. So they actually publish a notification outside of her district to be distributed to people that do not live in her district. So she's like, literally, we send money away for nothing. Now, they're trying to get that augmented so that you could do it if you wanted to in paper, but you could also engage in a centralized digital notification hub. So imagine like an Inform Idaho, where if you're wondering about your local elections, you could go there, you could look up your information, you could sign up for notifications. I'm not doing that, but you can if you want, things like that. Like that's the vision. Or you could use like, I don't know, the Ranch Podcast to like publish information about your local elections, whatever it might be. That will never be reported on because it would have to be reported on by newspapers who by design are like, this is a bad idea. Like that will never see the light of day for any newspaper ever, even though it's the right thing for Idaho.
I feel like that comes up all the time in these legislative sessions, and there's always a good argument for getting rid of that, and it seems to hold on. I think Representative Wheeler was just talking about it, about like newspapers automatically have this database that they can keep historical information on. So they provide the reasons for it, but you're right. That's a perfect example of an issue that if that changes, nobody's going to know about it. If it doesn't change, nobody's going to know about it.
Dude, make a statewide database. You want me to print out the time and place of place and put it in a box? Like we store ballots.
Yeah.
We could store information about where do you want to go? It's like, pull it up. Like, let's get that old like library, thing where like the stacks and with the things and
the Dewey Decimal System. Yeah, I'm following.
Like, dude, we could we have filing cabinets. Like we don't need individual localized like county or local newspapers to be doing the digital storage. Like what kind of antiquated mechanism for important governmental storage is that? Like that's just terrible.
You're trying to put newspapers out of business because you're a podcaster. That's your problem here. And you say you're the Switzerland of Idaho. Here you are, biased against our good, hardworking journalists.
Listen to me. I have Margaret Carmel on all the time. I have her on all the time. I never ask her to interview me. You know what the problem with journalism, though, in general, and you have to understand this, is there's an inherent filtration mechanism that you cannot get around. Like you will never get around. You talk to people see the guest, they see you, they hear the conversation.
Yeah. One of the problems we have right now with a lack of really good political reporting, particularly in print, is there's not a financial incentive to do the real investigative pieces. Like when was the last time somebody broke this story about scandal in Idaho politics? I haven't seen anything, and it's not that it's disappeared. I don't think the money's there as it used to be. And then you've got a lot of viewers that just initially say like left-leaning paper. I don't know I can't think of a right-leaning newspaper, but once you chalk it up as being a biased newspaper, they're not going to listen anyway. So we got a problem with political reporting in Idaho, at least in print.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. But again, I think one of the problems is that you will always be biased one way or another if you have to be the filtration mechanism, right? Like the criticism we could get is, why did you have that guest on? Or why didn't you push harder back? It's like, listen, they told you their position. If you don't like it, you should let them know. And if you want to say I'm an idiot, I agree with you. But what I'm saying is you heard from the horse's mouth what their position is. Agree or disagree. It's none of my affair. Newspapers don't benefit from that.
Yeah. How much cutting and editing do you do of your guests?
Me?
Yeah.
Never.
Right. So same. So we don't go in.
I made one bad joke today that I'm going to cut. Like it wasn't. Okay.
Go on, then say it, and then you can cut this piece too.
I'll tell you. Okay. I was talking with Representative Redmond about the SNAP program and government funding candy and Coke, or candy and soda for SNAP recipients. And it's like 10% of every dollar spent goes to candy and soda. Okay. And I was thinking in my head, this is the reality of thinking and having a good faith conversation. I was thinking in my head, I was like, what other place do we have government funded diet systems? And instantly I'm like, well, do we give soda to people in jail? And the second I said it, I was like, did you just make an analogy between people in jail and people in the SNAP program? Like, that's a bad look. Yeah. So I'll cut that. But like, that was just what I was like, okay, government funding jail and government funding food systems, right? One happens to be with people incarcerated. One happens to be in the SNAP program. Like, of course they're not the same thing, but like, that's the only thing I'm going to cut.
But the point here is you don't go through and pick the best quotes from your guests to make them look good or bad or this is the conversation we had before. You got these special sponsors that are telling you, hey, actually, I need you to not talk about that. So cut it.
I don't have those.
Right?
I would have those if I accepted them. Yeah. To be clear, I don't have special sponsors that are telling me what I can do.
Exactly. And that's what makes this different than most people do. Right. Yeah.
Well, I think the lift is just too hard. Like you've been at this for years. The lift of getting it off the ground is too difficult. And the only way you can do it is if you have some financial backing from the start. But if you have financial backing from the start, then you're obviously doing what those people want from the start, which leads to the whole platform being tainted.
But we've got elected officials and opinion makers and everybody you work with that, I mean, that's a risk. And shout out to the people that come on our podcast because the risk is high and the reward is small. So they can kill it and have a really good episode. And we hope that is good for them and the public. But it's a risk when they can also just put it out on their own socials where they can do their own thing and they can edit it and they can make it sound so where they don't have to get any questions asked. And so I think it shows some courage of anyone who comes on because they're rolling the dice on us that we're not trying to trap them, that we don't have a secret agenda in the world of cancel culture. I mean,
yeah, but you got a sweet jacket. Like I look like a hobo.
No, you've got your stick.
First off, next time I see you, I will have more of these. But I
want one.
You know what? You can have this one. Done. You can have this one. No sweat.
I don't think we're the same size. I'm just a little.
It's a large and it's a little bit tight on me anyway. You can have it.
And to your listeners, a lot taller than you would think. He walks in and I'm like, oh my goodness, Goliath is the podcast host. I'm already intimidated. You got 2 feet on me.
I'm so short. Every time people are like, wow, you're bigger than I was like, I would tell people I was on the rowing team. Like, I don't.
We didn't know you were the boat. Dude, and I always thought I thought that your guests were standing up. I was shocked to walk in and like, we're sitting, obviously. But
I always thought we're standing up.
I don't know. So maybe that's why.
Awkward. What do you have, a bad back and a standing desk?
Maybe that's why I thought you were short, is because this is how tall I thought you were.
Yeah, somebody did. There was a picture. I had Cameron Mulroney from the vice president of the Cattle Association on it had to be like 3-4 months ago. And the gal that came with him, Morgan Lutkin, who's super awesome, and she's one of their comm specialists, she came and she took a picture of us and she took it from from my side looking in. So, Cameron was farther away. I was closer and I had my leg straight out. And this woman was like, Jesus, she's like, you are gigantic. And I was like, well, I mean, okay, I'm not small, but it also makes me look huge. Cameron looked tiny. Like he looked like a little kid.
Poor guy.
Poor Cameron. Yeah. And
he won't be back. He's not coming back on the podcast.
I hope he is. God, I feel like I insulted him. I made this comment about somebody wanting me to cover a horse fair in April. And I was like, I don't care about a horse fair. Like, what do I care about? And the person was like, oh no, they'll have custom saddles there. I'm like, I'm not a custom, I don't care about custom saddles. And Cameron was like,
offended.
Oh, and then I find out he's like way into horses. I was like, shit, I'm a terrible person. Like I just run my dumb mouth. And like, then I find out that, you're like a horse lover and I'm just like crapping all over you.
But you haven't had any guests that are like, I will never go back because of the way he treated me.
No.
And I mean, people rant and rave about their experience. Yeah. Everyone from Secretary McGrain, like I'll ask all the people you have on, Alex Adams, Director Adams, and And I'll always say, so was this experience better than being on the ranch? And most of them kind of like him and ha and everything. And then they all say the same thing. They're like, well, have you been on a show? Man, that's high energy. So before I came today, I had to I was ready to get a nurse to put in a line of Red Bull to get me ready for this. Cause like, man, he's high energy. Good luck keeping up with him.
Oh my God, man. Have you ever spoken with Braden from the Farm Bureau?
Yes. Yeah. Braden Jensen. Great guy. He knows his stuff.
Love Braden. Great stuff. He's high energy too.
Yeah.
So he comes on, does a show, which is great. We talk about, they passed a bill, what was it, 608 2 years ago or something, that was Idaho-based land, not a land trust, but you could voluntarily enter into this thing for like 20 years. They didn't have any financial compensation. You couldn't develop on it for 20 years, but it did grant you benefits with like zoning and easement restrictions and things of that nature. So you did get benefit in that, like the city couldn't, or the county couldn't rezone your area. Like you got protections. You didn't get money, but you got protections if you voluntarily entered into this 20-year promise not to develop. So he comes in and tells me all this stuff. And then I see him at the farm convention. We're doing this. They have this like trivia thing up, and he makes a comment. He's like, listen, man, after I came on your show, I told a lot of people, like, I can hang with a lot of people. I could not match his energy. And he's a really high energy, bubbly guy. I was like, I'm not that bad.
Oh, man. Like, and it's a Friday afternoon, and you're still like running at a 10 today. It's impressive.
I have a great time. I love talking to people. Like and to that point, I am talking way too much in this interview. You got to tell me how you got into podcasting. Like, how did you say like, hey, sign me up to be the host?
No idea what I'm doing. This is the biggest.
I didn't ask if you know what. I didn't ask you if you know what you're doing. I asked how you got into it, because neither of us know what we're doing.
No, but I think we both share the same love of like political engagement, policy, like hearing from the right people. What I found is I was having these type of discussions over lunch or over breakfast with people. And there were so many people that weren't privy to the types of political or policy conversations that we should have. We're not good at it. We move ourselves into these vacuums where we unfriend everyone on our social medias who like only post the stuff that like if you're posting something I don't like, you're gone.
Right.
I always refer to the statistic about like 1 in 5 people stop talking to a close family friend as a result of the 2016 election. That is the most heartbreaking statistic to me, because we self-isolate and only listen. And I like having conversations with people that think a little different. And so I want to read Hillary Clinton's book on why she lost the election. And then I want to read Art of the Deal right after, right? Like I want to get both sides of the story.
That book was ghostwritten, bro.
Oh,
I guarantee it.
It was a sad book.
Well, she's not going to be happy.
There wasn't a happy ending to that one. But
we know. It's like reading a book on the Titanic. It's like, we know it sank.
It didn't work. Spoiler alert.
What was that predictive? That was like Mitt Romney's election prediction called like Orca or something back in 2012. And everybody after he lost, they were making the joke that like the Orca was found beached and dead on like somewhere.
He did a Netflix series. They followed him around that whole election, which somebody should have warned him. Hey, by the way, incumbent presidents typically don't lose. You know, you take out Carter and Trump, and you got to go back to FDR. Like HW was part of Reagan's, right? So, anyways, that they did a whole Netflix series with Romney, and they're like videoing him the whole time of like when he got told, and he's like, "Well, I didn't even write a concession speech." I'm like, "You were running against Barack Obama. Nobody told you might lose."
Yeah,
sad deal.
Yeah, maybe that was just to point of confidence.
Yeah. You gotta love the ego.
You got it in your pocket.
Love it.
Yeah, but they had that whole predictive thing with like the Orca, election prediction that had him like blowing out Barack Obama, and then he got destroyed, and then it was
all of them.
The Orca
right?
died. Yeah. Anyway, so look back to you. You enjoy learning about these things and trying to bridge the gap with like, listen, can't we just disagree and still have a beer together? Like, isn't that okay?
Right. Or this idea of I'm going to ask you a question while you're talking, instead of me thinking of how I'm going to combat that, how I'm going to push you to a position I want you in. I'm going to do something crazy, man. I'm going to listen. Oh. And so that's what I do. Is all I know how to do on this podcast is I ask some questions that I think my dad would want to know or my friends would want to know. And then I listen. And so like we both had Dr. Tubler on, right? Legend.
No.
Yeah, you
Tubler?
did. Am I saying his name wrong? The IVF guy. Kyle?
Oh, yeah. I thought TOO.
Oh, no.
Like, no, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, IVF guy. So I can't spell IVF, and I'm sitting across from this guy, and he's telling me about how they extract eggs, and I'm not putting it on. I very much have no clue what's going on. It's fascinating stuff. And so we get to be just curious and ask the right questions. And that's what makes it fun. But I'm always curious if when you're asking those questions, how quick you can cut through the BS of your guests if they're just giving you the campaign slogans. of like, well, Matt, we're gonna cut taxes and we're gonna invest and we're gonna do everything. And is that frustrating? Can you pick it out when you're like, come on, be vulnerable and real with me for a minute?
So look, you gotta meet people where they are.
Sure.
And I think one thing, I've had some guests on in the past that I could tell generally what people will do is they will look down and they will start talking in like a steady thing where you're like, oh, you're going into your thing. You're not making eye contact with me. Like you're removing yourself from the situation, recalling what you came here to say, and you're in the middle of it. And usually what I'll do, and I try to not interrupt people too much, like when we're having a serious conversation, but I'll be like, hey, wait, can you back up? Like, what do you mean? And what it'll do is it'll stop them from going down one path and force them to go down a different path. And that's not a disingenuous question. It's just like, just hang on. Like you can finish your spiel, but let's engage as human to human. And generally that derails speeches or monologues. And then it's like, okay, there we go. And we may still get to the exact same thing, but like let's meet as people. Mm-hmm. Like I dislike the idea that sometimes people come on, they're like, I just need to get this thing out while the cameras are rolling and then I can use that piece of content. Now, I think sometimes people come in and they're like, I need to say these things. And it's like, you don't know what I have to say. Like we can just talk and you can still get your message out, but let's just talk like a person. Yeah.
So that then begs the question, what are your talking points? When you go into an interview, do you have like, I want to get them from A to B and I want to make sure I get these questions in, or do you just
that I'm getting interviewed by you now. This is fantastic. No, I have no talking points.
Yeah. And so I get a lot of feedback on, hey, how do you do this without notes? I'm like, what would my notes say? Yeah. Like if I want to know who I'm interviewing, but I definitely don't want to lead them anywhere.
Right. The trick I think is to know enough to know when to shut up.
Yeah.
Right. Like you can't come in completely naive about Forest Service work, but you also have to come in understanding like there are a lot of nuances to this that you don't know squat about. So like just ask an authentic question. Right. Ask a real question. Like, how does this work? Can you just explain this to me? And then they just, people start talking.
Yeah. And they love it. And you get the real case.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. What's your favorite guest?
Oh man, that's a tough one.
Come on.
We've had some fun ones. We've had some really exciting ones. We went down to the governor's mansion in Utah, in Salt Lake, and that was a cool vibe for Spencer Cox.
That. Yeah.
Love or hate him. I will tell you that, that was, we interview people that have handlers. We interview people that are like, hey, before we start rolling, hey, maybe don't talk about this. And then that tells me like, that's what I want to bring up more than anything. I'm like, I figure we get there. But we're always respectful of what people's boundaries are.
Of course.
Governor Cox was probably somebody who should have been like, he had low reward in meeting with us. And he was not only generous with his time and his house, but he's like, ask me anything. That's one was cool in that he was so open about it. But I love talking to our local legislators that we can just banter with. Yeah. The Britt Rabels that are brilliant. You just had an episode with Britt coming out. Representative Rabel.
I had two. I did too.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was great.
She's fantastic. And so
she's really eloquent too.
She knows her stuff.
Yeah.
Just spent some time with Representative Matthias today. He's the real deal.
He's great.
Guy knows his stuff.
Again, very eloquent, very thought out. I really like Brandy from the Eagle Chamber.
Can you convince her to come on ours?
Hell yeah, man.
She's fun.
Like I said, you know what's so great about her? You and I have to carry so much stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Like we got to talk about heavy stuff. And I've had some guests on recently that were really upset about things going on in the state. And yeah, you have every right to be upset. Like I'm certainly not here to tell people their emotions or feelings on positions are wrong. But Brandy is always this like, it reminds me that conversations are fun. It's like we joke with each other. We have a great time. She always brings in stuff from the community. So we get to like showcase little, the mom and pop shops and different things. She brought me donuts today from Guru Donuts. It was awesome.
There's none left. You didn't save me one.
I didn't even eat my whole one. Listen to me. I've gained a lot of weight over the session.
The camera adds 10 pounds, Matt.
The stress weight and then not being able to work out because I'm sleeping like 4 to 6 hours a night.
Self-care matters.
Self-care matters. I'm going to only do 10 episodes next week. I'll have plenty of time to just get some sleep and drink coffee with my wife.
Are you enjoying it though?
Oh, every second.
Because people will wonder, is this like, does he put the face on? Is he actually this excited and energetic?
Dude, right now, it's 5:00 on Friday.
Yeah.
This is my 5th interview. I've banged out a gajillion this week. I am happy to be here.
Because of me or just in general?
Yeah, because of you. I mean, like, because we're having a cool conversation. Like, look, say I invite you over. I'm like, come over for a beer. I don't drink beer because I'm gluten-free. But like, come over for gin and tonic.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, what are we going to do? we're going to go to my house, we're going to get a drink, and we're going to talk trash exactly like this. Now, like, what part of that is upsetting? The only part that's upsetting is we don't have a gin and tonic right now.
Right.
If you ever make it to my studio in Eagle, I actually have like some drinks on the side. So like, this is it. Like, human to human interaction is always fun. You know, like, especially if you're hanging out with somebody you like or hanging out with somebody that's interesting or, you know, whatever it is. Like, it's not like it's work.
And we all wake up in the morning and wonder, like, is what I'm doing actually meaningful in the world? Like, am I actually changing the world? And we all have to have like that kind of, but I do think what you're doing in this space, it's appealing to people that have been politically apathetic. It's appealing to people who have been politically disenfranchised. And you're kind of evangelizing this idea of engagement of, I don't care what side you're on, come back.
Listen, man, we can't keep having this conversation if you keep saying what you're doing. As in me, you're doing the same thing. So start saying what we're doing.
You're right.
Right? Because you're doing the same stuff.
Trying.
You're on the other side of the state. You're trying to connect with people. You're traveling the country to interview people. Like, yeah. Like, look, the biggest concern I have is low voter turnout in the primary. Low voter turnout in the primary and manipulation from the mailers. That's my biggest concern. The legislation, the policies, yeah, like some are good, some are bad. By the way, I don't know what is good or bad. Like, let's be clear. And bottom line is the thing I care about is that people actually have a form of education, a mechanism of understanding that they will voluntarily consume so we can insulate Idaho from the bastards coming from the outside. That's all I care about.
I love it.
Like, I hate the lobbyists and the mailers. You should do it with me. We should collectively do a mailer watch. So mailers throughout the state, especially in the hotbed areas, like where people invest hundreds of thousands, I'm going to have a weekly update to the ranch site, and then like do clips like a couple of weeks. I'm like, here's the new mailer. Like, this one's ridiculous from North Carolina.
Yeah.
These people don't care about you or this guy at all. Don't pay attention to this. And then people will see like, oh, I saw that. Oh, that's not even, oh, okay. Like, it's from Texas or something.
So I did the RNC's campaign manager school many years ago, where they bring you in and they're like training the people of who's going to be the next up and coming campaign managers. And it was a good experience and I learned a lot. But one thing that I took away from that is the money that's involved in running a campaign. So you get a mailer from your local legislative candidate. Sometimes like we think that they printed that on their printer. We forget the fact that that was a vendor. And sometimes there's a middleman in between that covers that contract. And so those mailers, not only is it problematic that they're full of lies, but it's also problematic in that your grandma may have donated money to somebody because they thought they were doing something good. Those donations are producing these mailers, and you got to wonder, where's the money coming from? Because people are getting rich, and it's the vendors, right? Like, if you and I really want to make money, let's go open up a print shop and we'll print all of these campaign mailers. We don't care what we put on them, and we'll send them out. So that I just keep going back to follow the money and see where it goes. And there's so much money in campaigning that doesn't actually, like, even signs, like signs ain't free, right? Your yard signs, stuff like that. And there are people that get people spun up. And if you have competitive races, that's more money. I mean, nobody loves it more than the TV and radio stations, because then they get to put all of it. And it's fine and it's important and it's in part of elections, but it keeps going earlier and earlier. Like, the length of our elections, I'm not convinced that longer primaries actually means people are getting more informed. I'm convinced that it's causing people so many mailers is decision by paralysis, and they're like, well, forget this. I don't know what's true anymore. How often do we hear that? I'm struggling to know what's true and what's not true.
1,000%. Dude, you just said a ton. Like, yes, the industries around elections, the industry around politics. It's literally like the people selling the pitchforks and the shovels during the gold rush. They don't even care. They're like, find it or don't, but get your pick here, man. Like, that's the whole thing. You know, each of those mailers that they pump out, of course you would know, but like the average person, I was shocked. It's like each of the mailers that goes out is between $7,000 and $10,000. And people had stacks.
Yeah, 'cause you got to design them, print them. They're good. You have to have a better quality. And I mean, it's just, they keep getting bigger and bigger because you want yours bigger than the other one.
Folding.
You know what's crazy? Some of the companies that run campaigns, and you're talking, they run the campaign and then they have all these vendors that they have like specific contracts with. Some of those companies, political consulting companies, they are the company for both candidates. So what they'll do is they'll put up a firewall, right? So they'll ethically say like, hey, we're going to put a firewall so our side won't talk to your side. But one company is making the money from both, and the printing, obviously, like you got one printer that's like printing both of it. It's wild that, you know, you and your primary opponent could potentially be given money the same one.
You're all making some company rich. Again, the money around politics. That's why, like, I think it's really. Have you been following any of the USAID stuff?
Oh yeah.
Okay, great.
$8 million Politico subscription.
Right. Like, and what I was listening to the Ben's episode with Rogan the other day, and he was like, listen, independent journalism does not mean they're independent of people persuading them. It just means that they're literally not like a press secretary for the White House.
Sure.
It doesn't mean they're not being funded by U.S. tax dollars, and it doesn't mean that those U.S. tax dollars don't come with strings attached. So months back, somebody's like, you should apply for like federal journalism grants or something. I was like, oh, that's probably a good idea. Like, I don't know if I'm a journalist. We should try to get the press pass at the White House, by the way. I think we could get that.
I think you could get that.
I think you could. You've interviewed 2 governors. I've only interviewed 1.
Yeah, we could work on it. We both interviewed Congressman Simpson. That guy knows people.
That we should be able to get this. Like, no joke. And then, what we should do? The play should be you wear your jacket, I'll wear my hat and hoodie, but every episode we wear the press pass. So
we should just print our own. Do you think that's a federal crime if we just
pretty sure it's a federal crime.
Cut that.
Or do like a ranch. We could make our own press passes. It's like the ranch press pass.
We might be able to figure. I have bowled in the White House bowling alley. That's my claim to fame. So we're pretty close.
We're pretty damn close. I mean, you're pretty much best friends with Trump. Anyway, my cousin is actually Anna Polina.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so Congressman Simpson was saying that he was like, well, I'll tell her to come do an interview with you next time I see her. I was like, please do. We don't do Thanksgiving together. Anyway, the point is that, I forgot my point. The industry around elections, it's a train wreck.
Yeah. You were going on the independent journalism.
Oh, there it is. Yeah. There it is. So what I've realized is you and I probably represent the most independent commentary in the entire state, because I'm willing to bet that every single written journalist institution takes funding from the federal government, the USAID. So that leaves you and me. We're like doing the Lord's work out here. Just trying to talk to people.
But everybody's trying to pick apart, like, okay, what's Matt's political beliefs? Because if they can pinpoint you on ideology, then they can decide whether to discount you or accept you. And that's why I love that you are self-described Switzerland of Idaho. And that's so necessary. But I can't speak for you. I have no desire to run for office. And so the idea that I'm like I've got no agenda. We want to bring good people on and have conversations. But oh boy, if they could just kind of create a wedge and say, Matt is a leftist rhino and we shouldn't listen to him if we're on the right, and Brennan's a right-wing nut job, and so if we're centered left, we should avoid his podcast.
You have to get that stuff already, though. You get people trying to do that, right?
For sure.
Like, I have armies of people on Instagram that are either saying I'm a leftist, liberal fascist from California trying to kill Idaho, or I'm a hard right extremist, burn me at this, because I interview, whoever, right? Like, and what's really interesting is, when I see those people, like, I scrub my Instagram, I will take bad comments. Like, yeah, look, you criticize me, that's totally fine. But if I'm like, hey, you're just screaming that I'm a leftist fascist, like, you're restricted. So they're not blocked from the account, just nobody gets to see their comments anymore. And they keep coming, regardless of what the clip is. I'm like, oh, you're not even watching the clips. You just seize every opportunity. Anytime I post something, and like, if I showed you my Instagram, you'd see like an army of people that all they do is say you're a leftist fascist. I'm like, I actually messaged one of them the other day from a different Instagram account, because I can't talk to them directly once they're restricted. Sure. So I loaded an old Instagram account and I was like,
your burner
account? Man. Yeah, my burner account. I was like, hey man, you seem to really not like my podcast. Like, why do you keep following it? Like, you comment all the time just about how I'm a terrible person. Like, why?
Did you get an answer?
No, I never will. I don't think he's a human. Like, you have to get like bots and stuff.
Yeah. And
like, they're not even people.
And it's fine. And I think some of the best people in all industries get beat up a lot, right? And it's the idea of, well, there must be an agenda, there must be money. What's the catch? And I think we're just trying to figure out, how do we get people to engage?
Right.
We share the same goal, and that if somebody, I love when I hear people say things like, oh, I'm not involved in politics, I don't want anything to do with politics, caught your episode, man, I would. And then they start having constructive conversations about education policy. Like, I think of all the people in my life who say that they don't know about politics, they don't care about politics, but they run a small business and they know the details about the crippling regulations they felt. Or they're a school teacher that's like, I don't care about politics, but every day they're dealing with education policy. And we're trying to flip the light bulb on that's like, oh, you need to be at the table. Like you should care. Your whole life is politics.
Your whole life is policy. And you're advocating for what you think is right.
Yeah.
How do we get more people to participate without going down the road of crisis? Because that's the question.
Yeah. So you and I, we could blow up our podcast in terms of views, dollars, if we decided like we're just going to say the craziest stuff, right?
Let's go crisis. Let's do it right now.
Yeah. It's like nuclear. No, there's a real, like, that's what sells is these, I mean, you see what gets shared, what's get posted. It's crazy stuff, like crazy works. Like TV, CNN, Fox, all that. When they throw those like sky is falling headlines, you know their advertisers love it because it's drawing people in. They're watching what's going to happen next.
But how do we increase primary engagement without selling crisis to motivate?
Right. And what's the motivation? Why would your family take the time to get informed and then show up, especially when they just got blown up in the mailbox with all these mailers that they're confused now? Also, I think anytime anyone gets burned in a political conversation, it increases the likelihood that they're not going to have that conversation. They're not going to go to the polls. I hate the idea of like somebody getting owned on Facebook, like somebody really putting them in their place, or in a conversation like this. And suddenly you think you won because you let them know how stupid they were. Now they're not going to engage. They don't want to have those conversations. That's what worries me. So I know I'm drastically avoiding your question here, but the first question is why would somebody in Idaho want to get involved in the primary process? What's the motivation?
I think the motivation is one of policy, but I think the problem is that until now, there's no real mechanism to educate them about policy in a way that they'll voluntarily consume. That's the trick. So like one thing, like I'm a geek for communication. So one thing that I think is interesting, we're going through this transition between communication 1.0 and 2.0, which consisted of you had an active and a passive agent, right?
Sure.
In all communication, right? If I'm talking to you, I'm active, you're passive. That's how this goes. Okay. And it used to be 20 years ago that agencies and organizations could engage in the passive agent role. I would update my website, just tell everybody to go, and I walk away. And then people consuming, the end consumer of the information, they have to take an active role. So they have to go to the website. They have to like scroll through. I mean, websites are like phone books of information. Like you just got to go through, you got to find it, whatever. And that was the nature of it. And it wasn't entertaining. So you didn't have dual purpose communication where it's entertainment and, whatever. Now, this is completely flipped. This is where you have department mismatches where they're like, I don't know why everybody thinks these crazy things. Like we updated our website. They're still trying to be the passive actor. But what they don't understand is the end user has now taken the passive agent position. So we passively do this. There's no permission-based engagement. An email is permission-based. You have to look at the title and then make the decision to give that person permission in your head. I rarely read emails, right? Anyway. But again, the end user now is somebody that's doing this, and it has to be entertainment based.
Yeah.
So it's entertainment based and I'm passive, which means the only people that win are people that can take an active role and infuse valuable information, which is the trick. How do you educate people in a way that they will watch alongside their entertainment stream and get them engaged? That's the trick. Like that's the whole nature of like the 45-second Instagram reel where you actually convey information, but you do it in a way where people are like, I will voluntarily trade 45 seconds to watch this. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's how you educate people and entertain them and engage them in my mind. And if we can do that in the coming years, better and better and better, I bet we can drive more primary turnout. We just have to communicate with people the way they want to be communicated with in good faith. And we could stay away from the crisis. We could just make it clear to them what's at stake.
You hit the nail on the head in that you're not competing. We're not competing with CNN. We're not competing with the Statesman. We're competing with influencers. We're competing it's all when they're scrolling, we have to be as entertaining as
Indian street food vendors.
Right. Kevin Durant hitting a 3, right?
Yeah, right.
Those are the types of things like we're trying to pull people's attention on. And I think relevancy is the key. How do we take what's happening in Boise and make it relevant? And for some reason, people are so much more likely to care about the national issues that has oftentimes less influence on their life, which is why like our big thing is we always talk about like potholes aren't partisan. Like
Right.
let's talk about that stuff, right? Like we're trying to localize it. Localizing what we do is not sexy. It is not always sexy to talk about property taxes when we could be talking about big national issues. But
Right.
you don't talk a lot about Trump on your podcast. You don't talk about AOC, right? Because that's not necessarily the most impact, I should say, to your listeners, but that's the key, is relevancy. How do we go and like let them see? And I think education, when we talk education, that's something that's really relevant, because people look at their schools that are falling apart, or they think about curriculum, policing that you talk about, agriculture. These are all things they can see and touch, and it's right in front of them. It's hard to make the connection sometimes between education, policing, agriculture, the stuff you really focus on, and a primary election where the mailer doesn't necessarily talk about those things. The mailer's talking about guns, abortion, right?
Check this out. I have Sugar Beet Sam on. Sam Parrott, the queen of sugar beets.
Cool.
Right? She's the, I think, president or ED of the Sugar Beet Association. Okay. We have a conversation, or a portion of the conversation was about GMOs and yields, and how you can use GMO sugar beets that are Roundup ready. You use less pesticides because you can use Roundup. And by the end of the processing, there is not only no trace of glyphosate or any piece of Roundup once you get the sugar crystal, and it is identical in chemical value to an organic sugar beet. So GMO versus organic, the whole big question, right?
Yeah.
She goes this whole thing. I put that clip out. People lose them damn minds. Like, you're the devil. And here's like poor Sugar Beet Sam, like very articulate, clear woman. She's like, look at this is what, blah, blah. And what I find interesting that I'm digging into instantaneously is people are like, hey, you know what we did before Roundup? And they're like, you want to know the chemicals we used then? It's like, oh no, I've never thought about that. And somebody else, another farmer, was like, you want to know what's in organic sugar beets, how they keep the weeds away there? Because people have this road. Somebody was saying in the comments, like, why don't you just hire a bunch of teenagers, go out and weed? It's like, that's not the way this is going to work. But helping people understand. Now, again, whether you like Monsanto or don't, you like Roundup or don't, doesn't matter to me. But the agricultural community knows the value. They're not trying to poison people. And they would be like, this is what my grandfather did, and this is the result of it. Right? But we don't know what used to go down. We don't even know what the organic pesticides are and what we should be worried about with them. Like, you know, there's arsenic naturally occurring in the ground. Like, is that an organic pesticide? Like, I don't know these things, but like, you know, these are the questions that are like, damn, like this would be wild. So what we do is we try to bring that type of education. So when you have a primary thing and you have one guy saying like, we should outlaw GMOs, then it's like, fine, we should outlaw GMOs. That's your position. And like, by the way, what's the opposite of that? Somebody being like, you know what they do when they don't have GMOs? Let me tell you. And then it's like, okay, now people get to decide.
Yeah, but it requires two things. It requires context and nuance. And both of those things take time to explain. And so often in a election cycle, it's hard to provide context and nuance to the issues, which I think we try to do, and you do really well in the podcast platform, where you make your guests provide context, and then you break down the nuance of these issues are not always black and white. And there's a lot of gray there. And what about this? And it's why there's debate. It's why these votes are not always just party line votes. It's because there's so much nuance. So that can happen in policymaking, but in the court of public opinion, where people don't necessarily want to invest the time, man, it takes time to say, okay, what's the context of this issue? And then what's the nuance? And I mean, motivating people to invest the time. I was talking to a representative, Matthias, earlier, and we talked about how engagement's a privilege. If you're not, you have to have the time to engage. And sometimes people are just too worried about feeding their family to be able to even care about that at the end of the day.
But you know what? I think you're asking the wrong question. It's not, do they have the time to engage? They have time to sit on their phone.
Yeah.
They have the time there. One thing that I've been educated on recently, which I think is something that context matters.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
One thing I've been educated on recently, which is hilarious, and I can't believe I never thought of it. This elected official is like, listen, man, this is how bills work. It's like, you fire warning shots at the beginning of the session, and they're terrible, and you know they're not going to pass. And then you bring people to the table because they're afraid that the warning shot may take off. It's like you bounce back and forth, push and pull until you get to the middle where you want it to be anyway. And I was like, wait, so you're telling me like all of the anxiety and craziness in the first like week that we saw, they're like warning shots. That's all we do. And like people don't know this. So they get really upset kind of by design because they're like, you got to get people to come to the table. But it's like, no, we don't want to hurt Idaho. We want to get here, but it's like haggling. Yeah. When you haggle, you always start low or you start high, whichever side you're on. So you got somewhere to go. That's the legislative process. So now with a little over a month left, like now the big swings are kind of coming back to the middle. People are making compromises and then boom, we'll get some bills that shoot out. It's like, God damn, and people need to know that. Mm-hmm. Like, how cool would it be if every year when the session starts, like we do a big show, you and I get together at the beginning of each session and we're like, hey, everybody realize in the first 3 weeks, you're going to hear crazy because this is what's about to happen. Don't worry. In about the second month, towards the end, things are going to start moving. People are going to be worn down, but then things are going to even out. Like things are going to work out. It's not going to say you're going to get everything you want or you'll get anything you want, but just don't think that what happens in the first week is how this whole thing's going to go.
It's so important. And then the recap at the end to point out, I think these scoring systems from groups matter. If you love the Idaho Freedom Foundation, you should know what goes into their scoring foundation, right? You should be able to see, okay, their indexes, this is what they gave this bill. It's going to show up on a mailer. And a lot of organizations do it where they rank the legislators. This is how well they do. Knowing what goes into that and having at the end, okay, I voted against that bill and it got this grade. And this, you can expect probably my primary opponent to bring up these about me. And I think having that information is also really important on the end of it to see, okay, before and after, this is where we end up.
And just recognizing it's like, listen, if some bill passes in the end, it might have had 3 revisions during the legislative session, and Matt, may have voted against it in the first revision and then for it in the next 2, and I voted for it when it finally passed. But on the mailer, it's going to be like, he voted against that thing. It's like, on the first time around, I helped to get it. Like, that's the whole nature of bargaining. I'm not for it, fix it, bring it back, and then I'll vote for it. Like, yeah, I think we have a chance to really talk to people the way they want to be talked to, right? You obviously have a platform that has seen really good growth in like the last couple months. It's like, I've been watching guys. I'm like, they're getting it. Like it's taking off.
Figured it out.
It's taking it. Well, I don't even know if it's that you figured it out. It's just, sometimes it takes time.
Yeah.
Like you got to have a critical mass of things and connections and engagement. It's like, it takes time. And like, I'm sitting at 23,000 on Instagram today. 2 months ago, it was 13. Last May, I crossed 4. So it's like things happen in these fits and starts. And it's like, it just takes time. And by the way, before I got to 4, I was stuck at like 1,000 for like a year and a half.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you just go, it takes time.
Well, let's be clear what that means, because for some, that increase in following means increase in dollars. For you, I'm going to speak for you. Success in this space is more people hearing from the man in the arena, right? The people you were interviewing. Like success is the fact that people are coming to the table and listening. Yes. It's not monetized through following. Like, and that's the people always give us.
Money.
People are always wondering, like, okay, so this is your main gig, or this is how you're making money, and things like that. And it really just comes down to our goal is to get more people to table. Like we're lucky that we get to interact with the people we do, and I want to spread that out. And again, I think it's neat that people are willing to trust us, come and sit across from us. It's rare somebody gives me a piece of paper that's like, stick to the script. Instead, it's like, all right, what do you want to talk about? Let's do this.
I'd rather, and look, I'm not trying to get people, so I'd rather understand like, hey, is there anything you don't want to talk about? And 99% of the time, they're like, no, I don't care. Yeah. Like, let's full send. Occasionally, some people are like, you know what, man, I don't want to talk about this thing. It's like, fine. Guess what? I didn't even know that was a thing. We can avoid it completely. I'd rather have this be a great representation of your thoughts in these other areas. And they're like, great. But there's enough, like, let the radio host do like why you vote this way?
Yeah, catch him. Yeah. Like, no, that's the last thing.
So you're a crackhead. It's like, former. Yeah. Like, it's not my jam, man. Yeah. And like, that makes for great shock radio, I'm sure.
People ask often when we get started, they say, oh, can we edit this at the end? And I always say, sure. We can edit this at the end, and we never have to. We never do.
Never have to.
But I don't want them to ever feel like if I say something like wrong and I want to go back, because I'm not. My job is not to catch anybody. I don't want anyone to feel uncomfortable. If they want to reword something, they can. We never had to do it. We never go back because I want to create an environment that's casual, that's fun, that's a conversation you'd have sitting in your dining room, right?
Dude, 100%. 100%. I say the same thing. I'm like, this is not live. So like, and again, never. never do I have to edit things. The only time I edit things is when I like make a bad joke. Like I told you, it's like, I'll take that out. I will leave it in this episode because there's context, but in that episode, it was like, oh, that was a dumb thing to say. And I didn't have time to like go back and recap, but like, yeah, dude, like I think once, and I've seen it on your show, I've experienced it on my show. I think once people realize like, oh, this is a person, like then they're like, all right, it's no big deal. But if they think they're like always 1 second away from getting their throat slit, like that's where the media is now. And that's what's produced this really bad information system.
So one thing that's interesting, if you look at approval ratings for Congress as a whole, it's like below a dentist, right? Like, people hate Congress more than they hate anyone else. But if you look at each member of Congress's individual rating, pretty high. And there's something to be said about proximity. The closer you are, and not everybody is super close to their member of Congress, but it's the same thing where in the legislature, the closer you are to your representatives and you get to like, if they're knocking your door, you tend to like them more, or you tend to really not like them, but you at least have that information. And I think that's what one thing we're trying to do here is proximity. We're trying to bring all of these people. Phil McGrain cannot go to everyone's house, but we're going to try to put him in their metaphorical dining room to have a conversation. And the more of that we do, I think they'll want to engage. When we realize like we're modeling behavior, we want everyone to be able to sit across from their crazy uncle at Thanksgiving and have this type of conversation. And it can be done. We can have difficult conversations.
We can do it.
It just requires you got to listen and you got to ask questions that don't attack people's identity and don't make them feel like they're not competent or likable.
Right. I agree with you. Listen to me. It's 5:30. You got to drive all the way home. I got to go get my kids. Let's do this again next time.
I love it. This is the crossover of the century.
God bless you. So
thanks for the work you're doing.
Thank you for the work you're doing. Thanks for coming in.
Absolutely.
We'll do it again.
Thanks, Matt.